The wall does not forgive hesitation. A young recruit named Alara stands where the world ends, her breath a pale ghost in the haunted forest's frigid air. She has made a choice, a deliberate step into the unknown wilds beyond the safety of stone and ice. Her mission is to find a rare frost blossom, a flower vital for the Meister's healing stores, a small duty with immense consequences. This single decision will test her resolve against a wilderness that holds ancient secrets and an ever-present chill that watches from the shadows. By the end of her journey, you will understand the true meaning of courage in the face of the gathering dark. What ancient whispers might one hear in a forest that never forgets? Where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? Each footstep was a deliberate act of faith in the frozen ground. Alara's training took over, her eyes scanning the deceptive white blanket for the faintest hint of a shadow that might betray a hidden crevasse. She moved with a slow, steady rhythm, a lone figure against an endless expanse, and with every yard gained, the immense weight of her isolation settled deeper into her bones. Then, without warning, the world went mute. The distant calls of unseen creatures, the gentle rustle of snow-laden branches, all of it vanished into a vacuum of absolute quiet. The silence was not peaceful. It was a physical pressure, a palpable dread that tightened around her chest. She stood perfectly still, her breath held, the choice before her as clear and cold as the ice under her boots. Turn back to the known safety of the wall, or honor her vow and step into the unnatural hush. Her hand went to the small, empty satchel at her belt, a reminder of the lives that depended on her success. She took another step forward. As if in answer, the air itself seemed to solidify, the temperature plunging in a single, breath-stealing wave. This was no natural chill. It felt like a presence, an ancient and watchful cold that traced her every movement. It seemed to push against her, a frigid tide guiding her onward until her eyes fell upon the next trial, an ancient stream locked in ice, its dark water murmuring secrets from a fractured, half-frozen surface. The fractured ice groaned a deep, resonant warning that vibrated through the soles of her boots. Alara froze, every muscle tensed, the sound echoing the primal fear that had been tracking her from the woods. She was caught in a terrible balance, the immediate threat of the freezing water below warring with the chilling dread of what pursued her from the shadows. There was no time for hesitation. Her training surfaced through the panic, a clear memory of an old ranger's lesson on thin ice. She dropped slowly to her knees, then lowered her entire body onto the unforgiving surface, distributing her weight as evenly as possible. The groan subsided to a tense creak. Pushing her satchel ahead of her, she began to slide, an inch at a time, across the remaining stretch of the stream. Each movement was a prayer, her cloak scraping against the ice until her gloved fingers finally dug into the snow of the far bank. She scrambled up, her heart hammering against her ribs, and turned to look back the way she had come. There, just beyond the tree line, where the shadows were deepest, she saw them, faint, shimmering shapes, moved with an unnatural grace, silent and watchful, their forms seeming to drink the pale light. They were not following her across the stream, but their presence was a confirmation, a silent announcement that she was a guest in a realm that did not welcome visitors. The The sight severed her last thread of hesitation, pushing her toward the only shelter in sight, a dense grove of ancient weirwood trees, whose bone-white trunks and blood-red leaves offered a strange, solemn sanctuary. The grove of Weirwoods was a cathedral of silence and shadow. Alara stepped beneath the canopy of blood-red leaves, the air growing still and heavy. Her eyes were drawn to the faces carved deep into the bone-white trunks, their solemn expressions seeming to watch her. As she drew closer, she noticed a deep, crimson sap weeping from the carved eyes, flowing more freely than any sap she had ever seen. It looked like tears, thick and slow. Remembering old tales of the sap's sacred properties, her hands moved with a quiet purpose. She uncorked a small, empty vial from her satchel and carefully gathered the dark, glistening resin, a faint hope kindling within her. As the vial filled, a profound shift occurred. The sharp edge of her fear softened, replaced by a deep, resonant calm that seemed to emanate from the ancient trees themselves. She felt a connection, a silent acknowledgement from the old gods of this place, but the peace was fragile. A new sound began to thread through the grove, a low, whispering murmur that seemed to come from the very wood. It was a chorus of voices just beyond the reach of understanding, a susurrus of ancient words that tested the very edges of her courage. Instinctively, Alara knew this was a moment for respect, not for fear. She drew herself up, faced the largest of the Weirwoods, and spoke the words of her vow, her voice clear and steady in the hushed air. "I am the sword in the darkness," she began, the words a familiar anchor. "I am the watcher on the walls." As the final words faded, the whispering ceased as if it had never been. In the profound quiet that followed, her gaze fell to the base of the great tree. There, nestled among its roots as if placed by an unseen hand, was a single, perfect frost blossom, its petals shimmering with a delicate, icy lace. It was a small reward for her reverence, the very object of her quest. As she knelt to carefully harvest the precious flower, a sound from the distant world shattered the grove's sacred silence. The long, low note of a horn call echoed from the direction of the wall, a signal every member of the watch knew meant one thing. Danger was approaching. The horn's echo was a cold blade through the grove's lingering peace, a single, urgent note that meant only one thing. Rangers were returning in haste, and danger was close behind. Alara's mission shifted in an instant. The search for more blossoms was a luxury she could no longer afford. Tucking the single, precious frost blossom deep into her satchel, she turned her back on the Weirwood sanctuary and began a swift, cautious retreat toward the wall. Every step was now measured against the threat that had sent seasoned rangers fleeing. She moved with a new, grim purpose, her earlier calm utterly shattered by the pressing need to return alive. Speed was essential, but silence was survival. She knew that whatever had prompted that warning blast could now be somewhere in the forest between her and home. Choosing the longer, less exposed route back felt like a deliberate gamble with time, but it was a necessary one. She kept to the dense thickets and the shadowy lee of rock formations, her eyes scanning not for flowers, but for movement. It was this careful path that led her past the evidence of another's frantic escape. A small wildling camp lay just off the trail, utterly deserted. A cook fire still smoldered, a thin wisp of gray smoke curling into the air, and a half-eaten meal sat abandoned on a flat stone. The scene was eerily still, telling a wordless story of a very recent and panicked departure. The sight pressed on her, a silent alarm that screamed of an imminent, unseen threat. Before taking another step toward the wall, she needed to see what lay ahead. She moved off the path, climbing a short, rocky incline to find a hidden vantage point nestled among the stones. Her breath held as she peered down at the treacherous route home. From her hidden vantage point, the bronze-looking glass felt cold and heavy in her hand. Alara steadied her breathing and raised it to her eye, scanning the pristine white of the valley floor below. The magnification revealed what she had dreaded. Etched into the snow were tracks, but they were like nothing she had ever seen. They were deep, widely spaced, and utterly alien, a pattern that spoke of immense weight and a gait that was not human. They led in one unwavering direction, straight toward the distant shadow of the wall. The evidence was undeniable. Something other than men was on the move, and it was heading for home. Her duty was clear, a sworn oath to report this intelligence, but the open ground between her and the wall now seemed like a vast, exposed trap. To run directly would be to offer herself to whatever had made those tracks. A desperate plan formed in her mind, a gamble born of sheer necessity. She shifted her position, her eyes locking onto a precarious pile of stones on a distant slope across the valley. It was a risk, a blatant advertisement of her presence, but it was the only card she had to play. Using the leverage of a sturdy branch she found nearby, she pried at the base of the rock pile until the balance shifted. With a grating rumble that grew into a thunderous roar, the slope gave way, sending a cascade of stone and snow crashing down the mountainside. The diversion worked exactly as she had hoped. The echoing clamor filled the valley, a perfect distraction to mask the sound of her own movement, but it also painted a target on her general location. There was no time to second-guess the decision. While the echo of the rockslide still bounced between the peaks, she was already moving, scrambling down the opposite side of the ridge in a controlled fall, her cloak catching on thorns and sharp rock. She pushed forward until the ground leveled out abruptly, and she found herself standing before the dark, yawning entrance of a cave system, a place marked on old ranger maps and committed to memory during her training. The cave swallowed the outside world in a single, silent gulp. Alara lit her small, shielded lantern, its faint beam a fragile island of light in an ocean of black. The air was still and ancient, tasting of cold stone and undisturbed time. As she moved deeper, her light brushed against the walls, revealing not rough stone, but a story carved into the rock itself. Faded, intricate markings showed figures shrouded in darkness, their faces etched with fear, standing back to back with warriors cloaked in black against a tide of pale, advancing shapes. Here was the long night, and here were the first brothers of the Watch, their silent vigil captured for eternity. Running her fingers over the cool stone, she felt a profound shift within. Her own fears felt smaller now, her small quest part of a legacy that stretched back thousands of years. She was not alone. She was one link in a long, unbroken chain. This newfound clarity was shattered by a sound from the depths ahead, a slow, grating scrape, like something heavy being dragged across the stone floor. Her lantern flickered violently, not from a wind, but from a sudden, intense chill that seeped from the tunnel ahead. A choice had to be made, and light was now a liability. With a soft click, She plunged herself into an absolute darkness, so complete it felt solid. Her breath caught in her throat as she pressed her back against the cold wall, relying on memory and touch to guide her forward, one silent, shuffling step at a time. She found a narrow fissure in the rock and squeezed into its tight embrace, making herself as small as possible. The dragging sound grew closer, accompanied by a cold that pierced through her layers of wool and leather. It was a deep, mindless cold that flowed past her hiding place, a presence that did not breathe, but simply was, moving with a terrible, patient purpose. She held her breath, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, until the sensation finally ebbed and the sound faded back into the depths. For a long moment, she waited in the silence, then carefully relit her lantern. The sudden light revealed she had taken shelter in a small, man-made alcove. There, tucked away as if hidden in a hurry, was a rotted leather pouch. Inside, nestled safely against the passage of time, was a cache of perfectly crafted Dragonglass arrowheads, their edges still wickedly sharp. A forgotten gift from a ranger who understood that some weapons are meant for more than just men. Her hands did not shake as she reached for the Dragonglass. Each arrowhead was cool and impossibly smooth, a captured piece of the deep night, and she understood their terrible purpose. These were not weapons for battles between men. They were for the cold that walked, the ancient enemy the carvings on the wall had warned against. She carefully gathered several, securing them in the rotted pouch she had found, its leather stiff, but still serviceable. The weight in her satchel was more than physical. It was a sliver of hope, a tangible defense against the formless dread that had tracked her through the woods. For the first time since crossing the wall, she felt a flicker of genuine confidence, but the cave itself seemed to resent the theft. The air grew sharp and thin, the temperature plunging so rapidly her breath plumed in thick, white clouds. From the direction of the entrance came a series of sharp, percussive cracks, like a giant's footsteps, shattering a frozen lake. The cave was no longer a sanctuary. It was a tomb in the making, its only exit sealing shut with ice. Waiting here was a death sentence. She had to move now. Clutching the pouch of Dragonglass tightly, Alara abandoned stealth for speed, her boots slipping on the damp stone as she sprinted for the sliver of gray light that marked the way out. She burst from the cave's mouth into the fading twilight, gasping in the comparatively warm air, only to have her hope freeze solid in her chest. Standing between her and the path home was a silhouette, tall and unnaturally still. It was a creature woven from shadow and cold, its form seeming to drink the last of the day's light. There was no sound, no movement, just a patient, watchful presence that blocked her only route to safety. With a calm that felt both alien and absolute, Alara dropped to one knee. Her bow was in her hands, an arrow nocked. With deliberate fingers, she exchanged the ordinary stone tip for one of black obsidian, its wickedly sharp edge a silent promise in the gathering dark. The bowstring thrummed, a sharp, clean sound in the oppressive quiet. The Dragonglass arrow flew straight and true, a sliver of captured night aimed at the heart of the cold. It struck the center of the shadowy form, and for a single, suspended moment, nothing happened. Then the creature simply came apart. It did not cry out, but seemed to implode with a shivering gasp, dissolving into a fine, glittering mist that hung in the air like frozen breath. A wave of relief, warm and heady, washed over her. It was a victory, a proof that the old stories held power, but the relief was as fleeting as the mist itself. The glittering particles did not dissipate. Instead, they began to swirl, to draw back together with a terrible, slow purpose, the form coalescing once more from the very air it had bled into. And from the dark spaces between the trees, more of them stepped forward, their silent, shimmering shapes emerging from the deep shadows, a slow advance of countless watching eyes. There was no time for a second shot, no chance for a stand. Alara's hands moved with a frantic certainty, knocking and loosing 2 more arrows in rapid succession. They were not aimed to kill, but to disrupt, to create a momentary barrier of shattering cold and confusion. As the arrows found their marks, she spun on her heel and ran. Her boots pounded against the frozen earth, the sound of her own frantic breath loud in her ears. She did not need to look back to know they were coming. She could feel their pursuit in the sudden, biting cold that chased her, a chill that seeped into her cloak and stole the warmth from her skin. They moved with an unnerving, gliding swiftness, silent hunters, closing the distance with every one of her ragged strides. Her lungs burned, each gasp a knife of frigid air, but her eyes were locked on the crumbling silhouette ahead, the broken shell of an old watchtower, its stones a promise of some small defense. She pushed her body for one final, desperate sprint toward the ruins. Her final desperate scramble sent her tumbling over the broken wall into the tower's courtyard. Without pausing, her body moved on pure instinct, fueled by the chilling silence of the pursuit. She grabbed at the rubble around her, heaving fallen stones and splintered timber against the crumbling archway that served as the main gate. Each heavy block she shoved into place was a whispered prayer, a fragile barrier against the gathering dark outside. When the last stone was set, she finally allowed herself to slump against the cold wall, her chest heaving as she dragged the frigid air into her burning lungs. The respite was brief, shattered by the first soft scrape against the other side of the barricade, then another and another, until the sound was a constant, dry rustling like insects skittering across parchment. Through the narrow cracks between the stones, she could see them, their pale, shimmering forms shifting in the twilight, a silent army patiently testing her defenses. She could not stay here. The ground floor was a trap. Forcing her trembling legs to obey, Alara turned and climbed the partially collapsed staircase, each step a precarious gamble on ancient, rotting wood. She emerged onto the tower's broken summit, the wind whipping at her cloak, and the view that greeted her was a cruel mixture of hope and despair. There, far in the distance, were the faint, welcoming fires of Castle Black, a promise of warmth and safety that felt as distant as a star. But between her and that sanctuary, the land itself seemed to be moving, as more of the pale shapes emerged from the forest to join the throng surrounding her stone prison. Their numbers were growing, and the night was deepening. It was then, in the near-total darkness, that she noticed a soft, reassuring glow emanating from her satchel. She reached in and pulled out the small vial of Weirwood sap. The crimson resin pulsed with a gentle inner light, casting a faint red hue on her frozen hands, a silent beacon in the overwhelming dark. The sap's light pulsed in her palm, a small, warm heart beating against the encroaching dark. Driven by a desperate hope, Alara uncorked the vial. The glow intensified instantly, flooding the broken tower top with a soft, crimson radiance. The effect on the creatures below was immediate. A collective, soundless hiss seemed to ripple through the air as the pale figures shrank back from the light, recoiling from its warmth as if it were fire. For the first time since her flight began, she had a small, protected space, a fragile circle of safety in a sea of hostile shadows. But the relief was tempered by a chilling reality. The sap was not a bottomless well. She could already see the level inside the vial had dropped slightly. This was not a permanent shield, but a temporary reprieve, a race against time, measured in drops of sacred resin. With the light holding the immediate threat at bay, she used the precious moments to search the summit. Her eyes, now aided by the red glow, scanned the frost-covered stones until they found it, half buried in ice and debris. An old bronze warhorn, its mouth caked with frost, lay as if waiting, her breath caught. She remembered the old tales, stories of rangers using such horns to send signals across vast, frozen distances, their calls carrying warnings or cries for aid. But sounding it now was a terrible gamble. Its voice would surely carry to Castle Black, but it would also ring out as a beacon, potentially drawing every listening thing in the haunted forest directly to her position. The choice was stark: die silently in this crumbling tower, or risk summoning salvation and possibly a swifter end. Taking a deep, steadying breath that misted in the cold air, she raised the horn to her lips and blew with all her remaining strength. The horn's call tore through the night, a deep, mournful bellow that shook the very air. The note hung for a long moment, its vibration a physical force against the silent army below. The effect was immediate and profound. Every pale, shimmering form froze in place, their advance halted as if the sound itself had turned them to ice. In the sudden, absolute quiet that followed the echo, Ilara's own breath seemed deafening. She stood poised on the broken tower, her entire being focused on the distant shadow of Castle Black, listening for any sound that was not the whisper of the wind or the frantic beat of her own heart. Seconds stretched into an eternity, each one a slow erosion of her fragile hope. Then, a soft, dry rustle began again from below. One of the figures shifted, its head tilting upward, and the terrible spell of the horn was broken. The circle of creatures began to close in once more, their patience clearly at an end. Her time was up. With a resigned finality, she looked at the vial in her hand. The Weirwood sap's crimson light was already beginning to gutter, its protective glow fading like the last ember of a dying fire. She would have to run, to use its final moments of radiance to carve a path through them, a desperate, likely fatal gamble. She tightened her grip on her bow, ready to descend into the swarm, when a new sound split the night. It was another horn, clear and sharp and impossibly close, a single, defiant note from the direction of home. Her head snapped up. There, on the moonlit path, a line of torchlights bloomed like sudden stars, and the thunder of hooves announced the arrival of black-cloaked rangers on horseback, charging toward her besieged position. The thunder of hooves became a storm of black wool and steel. A dozen rangers, their torches held high like defiant stars, crashed into the shimmering circle of creatures. Seasoned Ranger Denise led the charge, his Valyrian steel soared a blur of silver fire in the darkness, each swing forcing the pale forms to recoil from its searing heat. The disciplined wedge of men and horses carved a narrow, chaotic path through the enemy, driving them back from the tower's base with sheer, violent momentum. Denies reined his horse in sharply at the foot of the rubble, his face grim beneath his hood as he shouted up into the darkness. "Alara, now, descend. Do not look back." The command cut through her shock. She slung the ancient war horn over her shoulder and turned, scrambling down the crumbling staircase as stones and rotted wood gave way under her boots. The sounds of battle raged just beyond the thin stone walls, a terrifying chorus of clashing steel and silent, shattering cold. She leaped the last few steps, stumbling into the courtyard as a strong, gloved hand closed around her forearm. Denies hauled her up onto his horse behind him, her satchel of precious cargo pressed securely between them. As the horse pivoted to rejoin the retreating wedge, a new presence stepped from the tree line into the flickering torchlight. It was larger than the others, its form radiating an ancient, purposeful cold that seemed to still the very air. It stood directly in their only path to safety, a silent, immovable gatekeeper of the haunted wood. Without hesitation, Denies shouted a single, sharp command. "Wedge." As one, the remaining rangers closed ranks around him, their formation tightening into a spear point aimed at the heart of the new threat, ready to charge. From her precarious perch behind Denies, Alara knocked another arrow, the black dragonglass tip, a shard of pure night. She drew the bowstring back, her aim steadying on the large creature's face, on the twin points of cold blue fire that served as its eyes. She loosed the arrow. It flew true, striking one of those glowing orbs with a sound like shattering ice. The creature recoiled, a silent scream of rage and pain, reverberating not through the air, but through the very cold that clung to them. Its form flickered, and in that crucial moment of distraction, the wedge of rangers surged forward, Denies shouting a command that was lost to the wind as they broke through the fractured line. They were instantly at a full gallop, the thunder of hooves a frantic drumbeat against the frozen earth. Alara did not look back at the wounded creature. She twisted in the saddle, her body moving on instinct, knocking and firing arrow after arrow over her shoulder into the shimmering tide that flowed after them. Each shot was a prayer, a small act of defiance to slow the relentless pursuit. The world narrowed to the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the whistle of arrows leaving her bow, and the chilling silence of the things that followed. Then a strangled cry cut through the night. She watched in horror as a pale, whip-like tendril of cold lashed out from the swarm, coiling around the leg of a ranger to her left and yanking him from his saddle. His torch spun through the air and was extinguished in the snow. There was no time to stop, no chance to even slow. Dennis' grip on the reins tightened, and the party rode on, the terrible, unspoken law of the watch enforced in that single, devastating moment. They could not save him. The sacrifice was a cold stone in Alara's stomach, a brutal reminder of the cost of survival beyond the wall. But the lights of Castle Black were growing brighter now, each one a promise of sanctuary. As they neared the immense shadow of the ice, a deep, groaning rumble echoed from ahead, the sound of ancient mechanisms stirring to life. The great gate was beginning to open. The great gate of Castle Black slammed shut with a final, earth-shaking thud, the sound of heavy wood and iron barricading the world of men from the haunted wilds. The sudden silence within the courtyard was profound, broken only by the ragged breathing of the horses and the men who had returned. Alara slid from the saddle, her legs buckling beneath her as the adrenaline that had sustained her finally ebbed away. She caught herself against the horse's flank, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the satchel. With a deep, steadying breath, she handed the single, perfect frost blossom and the pouch of Dragonglass arrowheads to the waiting Meister, whose eyes widened at the sight of the ancient weapons. The Lord Commander was upon them in moments, his face a mask of grim stone in the flickering torchlight. He demanded a report, and between them, Alara and Denise painted a terrifying picture. They spoke of the unnatural silence, the shimmering forms that moved with a silent, patient intelligence, and the sheer, overwhelming numbers they had witnessed from the tower. Alara's voice grew steadier as she recounted the details, her gaze unwavering. Then she unslung the ancient bronze war horn from her shoulder. "It is more than a signal device, my lord," she said, her tone certain. The way they reacted to its call, it held a power they feared. The Meister, who had been quietly examining the horn, looked up, his expression deeply troubled. He ran a finger over a series of faint, weathered runes carved along its bronze length. He translated them slowly, his voice a hushed whisper. "They speak of a waking sleep," he said. "This does not summon aid. It stirs something that slumbers." A profound silence fell over the group as the implication settled upon them. They had not merely escaped a threat. They had discovered a key to a far greater, dormant danger. Sent to the common hall for warmth and a bowl of stew, Alara found she could not feel the heat from the fire. The warmth of the broth was a distant sensation, unable to penetrate the deep, lingering cold that had settled in her bones. She became aware of the stares from the other recruits. They were not the suspicious or dismissive glances she was accustomed to, but looks of open awe and a newfound, solemn respect. They had seen her return with the Rangers. They had heard the whispers of Dragonglass and ancient horns, and they now looked upon her not as a new recruit, but as a sister of the Watch who had faced the true enemy and returned to tell the tale. The great hearth in the common hall pulsed with a heat that could not quite reach the cold deep within her. Alara sat on a rough-hewn bench, a bowl of untouched stew cooling in her hands as a small circle of newer recruits gathered around her. They leaned in, their faces illuminated by the firelight, their eyes wide as she quietly recounted the sight of the alien tracks and the silent, shimmering advance from the tower. Her voice was low and steady, devoid of dramatic flair, which made the details of the dragging sound in the cave and the shattering Dragonglass arrow all the more chilling. A new energy, a current of grim purpose, began to flow through the hall as her story passed from one listener to the next. For the first time, the old tales of the long night were not just history, they were a warning from yesterday. But not all ears were sympathetic. From a shadowed corner, a grizzled veteran named Bowen scoffed loudly, his voice cutting through the hushed reverence. "A recruit's fancy," he declared, amplified by fear and the tricks shadows play in the deep wood. He questioned how one girl could have seen what seasoned rangers patrol for years without encountering. The hall grew tense, the crackling fire the only sound for a long moment. Alara did not flinch or raise her voice. She met his skeptical gaze and described the precise, widely spaced pattern of the tracks, the way the creatures moved in a unified silence that was anything but animal, and their reaction to the Weirwood sap's light. Her calm precision was a wall against his disbelief, each detail a stone laid in defense of her truth. This debate, simmering between the hearth and the shadows, revealed a dangerous crack in the Watch's foundation. It was a divide between those who remembered why the wall was built and those who saw only ice and empty forest. Such a division could fester, turning brothers against one another and blinding them to the true nature of the threat gathering in the north. The unity of the Watch was its greatest strength, and now it was being tested by a story from beyond the wall. Later that evening, as the hall began to empty, a quiet word from a steward sent Alara moving through the drafty stone corridors toward the Lord Commander's private chambers, the weight of the entire evening resting on her shoulders. The Lord Commander's study was a room of quiet authority, smelling of old parchment and beeswax. Alara placed the empty vial of Weirwood sap and the ancient bronze horn carefully upon his heavy oak desk. The commander's gaze was fixed not on her, but on the artifacts, his fingers tracing the cold, empty glass before moving to the horn's weathered runes. His first question was a quiet blade, testing the seams of her story. Why risk the horn's call, knowing it could draw every hostile thing in the forest directly to your position? Alara did not drop her eyes. The choice was between a silent end and a chance, however slim, that the Watch would hear. "My vow is to be the light that brings the dawn," she replied, her voice steady. "I chose to be a spark in that darkness, not a stone lost within it." He questioned her decision to take the Dragonglass, calling it a theft from a place of old power. She admitted the fear she felt in that cave was a living thing, but the carvings showed her that those weapons were left for a purpose, for a Watch that would one day need them again. With each answer, she anchored herself not in defiance, but in the solemn words of her oath. Finally, the Lord Commander leaned back, the stern lines of his face softening into something akin to grim respect. "You saw the true enemy, and you did not break. Your resourcefulness has returned to us tools we had forgotten." He stood, his decision made. "At first light, you will join Ranger Dennis Patrol as a full member." The weight that had pressed upon her since returning from the forest seemed to lift all at once. Stepping from the dim chamber into the torchlit corridor, she found Denise waiting, his arms crossed. He gave a short, approving nod. "Come with me," he said, turning without another word. He led her not toward the common hall, but down a narrower stairway, toward the deep, familiar scent of oiled steel and leather that meant the armory. The armory smelled of oiled leather and cold, hardened steel. Denise led her to a worn workbench, where a small, carefully wrapped bundle of Dragonglass arrowheads lay beside fletching tools and straight, gray feathered shafts. "This is not a task for the careless," he said, his voice low and serious. He demonstrated the precise, careful motions, showing her how to bind the wickedly sharp black glass to the wood with tight, secure wraps of sinew. One flaw, one loose binding, and the arrow could shatter in flight or fail to penetrate when it mattered most. Alara's hands remembered the frantic pressure of knocking those same arrows on the tower, the desperate hope they represented. Now, with calm focus, her fingers replicated Dennis' movements with a steady, practiced grace that surprised them both. Each finished arrow felt heavier than its weight in iron, a condensed sliver of responsibility. She understood that these were not merely projectiles, but promises of survival, each one a potential defense against the encroaching silence she had faced. As she worked, a quiet resolution settled within her. She would not hoard this knowledge. When the moment was right, she would ensure other recruits learned this craft, turning individual fear into a shared, fortified strength for the entire watch. The rhythmic, deliberate work was a silent ceremony, marking her passage from the uncertain girl who had crossed the wall into a sworn sister. Her place in the ancient brotherhood now sealed not just by words, but by a tangible skill to defend it. With the last arrow completed and laid carefully beside the others, she stepped out into the quiet courtyard. The deep indigo of the night was slowly giving way, the first delicate brushstrokes of dawn painting the eastern sky in shades of pale gold and rose. The first rays of dawn painted the top of the wall in fire. Alara climbed the final rungs of the ice-slicked ladder, pulling herself onto the vast, wind-swept parapet to stand her first official watch. The haunted forest stretched out below, an endless sea of green and white, but it no longer looked like a faceless monster. She could trace the path of her own journey now, a silent map of fear and survival etched into the landscape. She knew the grove of Weirwoods where she had found a moment of peace, the rough terrain where she had triggered the rock slide, and the distant, shadowed line where the ancient cave waited. The forest was still a realm of profound danger, but it was a danger she had learned to measure, a part of her duty she now understood in her bones. A deep, lingering chill clung to her, a ghost of the cold that had pursued her, a constant whisper that the threat was not gone, only waiting. It was this understanding that solidified her resolve. She would not wait for it to come to them. When the call came for the next ranging, she would volunteer, not as a recruit fulfilling an order, but as a ranger defending her home. Her quiet decision, spoken to the morning wind, did not go unheard. The other new sentries on the wall, who had listened to her story in the hall, exchanged glances. One by one, they too made their own silent vows, their fear now tempered by the example of someone who had faced the dark and returned to stand watch against it. The sound of careful footsteps on the icy stone broke the morning quiet. The Meister approached, his robes whipping in the high wind, and held out a small, carefully wrapped parcel bound with sturdy twine. The parcel was heavier than it looked, its leather wrapping soft with age. The Meister's gaze was intense as he pressed it into her hands. He told her that her return, and the evidence she brought, had sent him deep into the castle's oldest archives. This book, he explained, holds transcribed legends of the Horned Lord and the earliest tales of the Long Night, stories many considered mere fireside fables. He believes her experience is a key, one that might unlock warnings and prophecies their order has foolishly chosen to forget. Alara accepted the weight of the book, understanding it was more than parchment and ink. It was a responsibility. She gave her word that she would study its pages and share what she learned with Denise and the other rangers, but she also felt the sharp edge of the risk. In a brotherhood built on tradition, seeking answers from forgotten lore could be seen as a challenge to the established way, drawing the wary eyes of those who believe the past should remain undisturbed. The fate of the watch could hinge on remembering what it has chosen to bury. Securing the book safely within the folds of her cloak, she turned and made her way down to the training yard, the need to master her new Dragonglass arrows now feeling more urgent than ever. The sharp crack of Alara's arrow, striking the training yard post, echoed like a splintering icicle. She worked with a quiet focus, her movements economical as she knocked another Dragonglass-tipped shaft. With each release, her confidence grew, the black glass finding its mark with unnerving consistency. A small crowd began to gather, a mix of newer recruits and a few seasoned rangers, their usual sparring forgotten as they watched the strange, dark arrows fly. One young man finally found his voice, asking her in a hushed tone to show him how to bind the sharp, brittle tips without shattering them. From the edge of the yard, a veteran named Bowen let out a derisive snort. "Fancy arrows for a child's nightmare," he called out, his voice carrying across the quiet space. "Good northern steel has served the watch for thousands of years. It will serve long after those glass toys are dust." The tension in the yard tightened, all eyes shifting from the ranger to the recruit. Alara lowered her bow, her expression calm. She did not argue. Instead, she turned and pointed to a weathered shield, leaning against the far wall, a distance that tested the very limit of a longbow's accurate range. She invited him to watch. She took a single, deep breath, her entire body stilling into a perfect line of concentration. The draw was smooth, the release clean. The black arrow became a blur, a sliver of night, crossing the yard to strike the center of the distant shield with a solid, definitive thunk. The sound seemed to hang in the sudden silence. Bowen stared, his earlier scorn replaced by a look of grudging, unsettled calculation. The demonstration required no further words. Several of the onlookers immediately stepped forward, their skepticism replaced by an urgent curiosity. Their questions now focused on the weight and balance of the strange new weapons. A small, crucial shift was taking root in the yard, one carefully placed arrow at a time. As the morning sun climbed higher, its warm light doing little to dispel the chill of the new knowledge settling over the watch. A single, clear horn note cut through the air, a summons calling every ranger to the main hall for new orders. The Lord Commander's voice was a low rumble in the crowded hall, announcing a ranging not of mere patrol, but of purpose. Their mission was to scout a location for a new, forward watchtower near the Fist of the First Men, and Alara's patrol was chosen to lead the way. The weight of the honor was immediate, a heavy cloak of responsibility that marked her as a key part of the watch's renewed vigilance. This was no simple border check. The Fist was deep in contested territory, a region whispered about for its wildling camps, and the older, colder dangers that slept beneath the stone. The days were already shrinking, each sunset a reminder of the deepening cold that would soon own these lands. While others exchanged grim looks, Alara's mind was already moving, her thoughts tracing a path through the wilderness. She saw not just a map, but the lessons from her solitary journey, the need for concealed routes away from open valleys, the vital importance of sheltered camps, and the exact location of that hidden cave, should they need sudden refuge. Success would give the watch its eyes far into the north, a crucial advantage against the gathering dark. But the cost of a misstep was unthinkable, the potential loss of every ranger under her command. That evening, by the guttering light of a single candle, she checked and rechecked her gear, the familiar actions a quiet ritual against the new and formidable weight of command, now settled firmly upon her shoulders. The familiar sounds of Castle Black felt different in the deep night, each one a precious thing to be stored away. Alara walked the high battlements, her gaze tracing the warm yellow glow from the great hall windows and the distant, rhythmic footsteps of a sentry on the far wall. She was memorizing this place, this feeling of safety and community, tucking it deep within herself like a spare arrow in a quiver. It was a memory she knew she would need to draw upon in the frozen, silent days to come. With this quiet act of preservation came a sharp, clarifying fear, far more potent than her earlier dread of the unknown. This was the cold knot of responsibility, the fear of failing the men who now looked to her for guidance on the path she alone had recently walked. This was a weight no amount of Dragonglass could deflect. She found Denise and the other senior rangers near the armory, their faces lit by a single torch. She did not seek reassurance, for none could be given. Instead, she moved through their final plans with a calm precision, confirming each leg of the journey, each potential fallback position, and every signal for danger. Her questions were direct, her understanding absolute. The trust the Lord Commander had placed in her was mirrored in the grim nods of the seasoned men around her. The success of their mission, the very safety of every ranger who would follow her into the White Waste, now hinged entirely on the foundation she was helping to solidify in these final hours. Only when every detail had been reaffirmed did she feel a semblance of peace. Satisfied, she turned from their company and made her way back through the quiet courtyards to her small chamber, knowing that in a few short hours the pre-dawn horn would sound and the true test would begin. The deep quiet of the barracks was broken only by the soft rustle of wool as Alara tightened the straps on her bedroll. A shadow fell across the floor, and she looked up to see a young recruit standing hesitantly in the doorway. It was the boy she had spent long evenings with, patiently helping him shape his letters on scraps of parchment. He said nothing, but his hands, usually stained with ink, now held a newly forged dagger. He offered it to her, his eyes wide with a solemn earnestness. The blade was simple and functional, but the pommel was set with a single, smooth chip of pale weirwood. This was not a tool, it was a testament. It spoke of the respect she had earned not through fear, but through patience, a quiet symbol of the fragile camaraderie growing within the watch. The gesture struck her with a force that tightened her throat. For a terrible moment, her mind raced with the protocols of command. Accepting such a personal gift could be seen as showing favor, creating divisions where unity was everything. But to refuse this heartfelt offering, to spurn the trust it represented, would be a wound that might never heal. Her decision was swift and certain. She met the recruit's anxious gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod, accepting the dagger with both hands. "I will carry this with the honor it deserves," she promised, her voice low and steady. The boy's shoulders relaxed, his expression shifting from worry to proud relief. This small exchange, away from the eyes of commanders and veterans, was a different kind of strength. It proved that true leadership was forged not just in command, but in the quiet moments of brotherhood. She placed the dagger carefully beside her packed supplies, her fingers lingering on the cool metal. As she did, the weirwood chip set into the hilt seemed to hold a faint, comforting warmth, a small echo of the grove's protection she now carried with her into the gathering dark. The familiar murmur of the castle was a soft blanket in the deep night. Alara lay in her bunk, listening to the distant crackle of the great hall's fire and the rhythmic footsteps of the watch change on the wall above. Each sound was an anchor, a reminder of the fragile community she was now sworn to defend. But as the quiet settled, her mind began to race, unbidden, through a gauntlet of what-ifs. She saw the new outpost standing strong against the wind, a beacon of vigilance. Then just as vividly. She saw it overrun, shadowy forms spilling over a broken wall, the consequence of a single misread path or a hesitant command. The weight of every life in her patrol pressed down upon her in the darkness. With a conscious effort, she drew a slow, deep breath, stilling the turbulent thoughts. She focused on the simple, physical act of breathing in and out, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. This was not a time for fear, but for restoration. The clarity of her mind at dawn, the steadiness of her hand on the trail, these things depended on the peace she could find now. Rest was not a retreat from duty, but a vital part of it, as crucial as a well-honed blade. Slowly, the frantic scenarios lost their edge, fading into the background hum of the sleeping castle. When sleep finally came, it did not bring dreams of ice or silent pursuit. Instead, she found herself standing in a sun-dappled grove, before a great weirwood whose red leaves whispered comfort, not warnings, in a gentle, unfelt breeze. The warmth of a sun she had never felt soaked into her skin. Before her, the great weirwood stood not in a haunted grove, but in the heart of a vast, endless summer, its leaves a brilliant crimson against a sky of pure, cloudless blue. She looked toward the horizon, but the wall of ice was gone. In its place stood a barrier of immense, intertwined roots and living wood, a living, breathing fortification that pulsed with a deep, quiet energy. The carved face of the tree did not speak in words, but poured its meaning directly into her mind, a cascade of images showing ages of long, green summers and deep, star-filled winters, a cycle that turned with the slow, patient rhythm of the earth itself. Her small fight, the fear, the cold, all of it was a single thread in a tapestry woven over thousands of years. This understanding settled into her not as a thought, but as a truth, a profound and unshakable peace that filled the hollow places the cold had left behind. Then the world fractured. The vibrant green faded, the warmth bled away, and she was jolted back into the familiar chill of her bunk. For a long moment, she lay perfectly still, the feeling of the dream clinging to her more vividly than any memory. It had felt less like a dream and more like a memory of a place she had never been, ascending from something ancient. Was it a gift of clarity from the old gods, or simply her own desperate mind, weaving a comforting lie from the threads of exhaustion and hope? She made her choice in the deep quiet. She would hold the feeling of that sun, the sight of that living wall, close against her heart. It was a private wellspring of certainty, a secret strength not meant for sharing. Some truths were too fragile for words, their power meant to be carried silently within. This one would be the bedrock upon which she would stand when the fear returned. The long, low note of the waking horn shattered the stillness, its call pulling her from the warmth of her blankets into the crisp, pre-dawn air. She rose, the dream's piece a steady, quiet ember inside her, and began to dress for the long journey north. The crunch of her boots on the frozen courtyard was the only sound Alara allowed herself as she approached the gate. Her pack was a familiar weight, but today it felt heavier, laden with the Dragonglass arrows and the new dagger. The patrol was already formed up, a line of black wool and grim faces. She moved down the line not as a recruit, but as a ranger, her eyes missing nothing. A loose strap was tightened, a waterskin secured, a dragonglass tip checked for a secure binding. Denai's watched from the side, his arms crossed, offering a single, slow nod of approval. Their efficiency was a stark contrast to the usual chaotic last-minute preparations. This patrol was ready days ahead of schedule, a testament to the new discipline born from a shared understanding of the threat that waited beyond the stone and ice. Then came the deep, groaning rumble of the great gate, beginning its slow ascent. The sound vibrated up through the soles of her boots, a physical feeling of transition. The heavy wood and iron lifted, inch by tortuous inch, to reveal the world beyond. The haunted forest stretched out, an endless expanse of pristine white and deep, consuming green, a sight that could still steal the breath from the hardiest veteran. Ilara took her place at the front of the column beside Denai's, her face a calm mask that hid the sudden, cold knot in her stomach. This was more than a scouting mission. Each step they took would be an act of reclamation, a deliberate statement from the living, pushed back into a realm that had been slowly slipping from their grasp. The Lord Commander stood to the side, his gaze sweeping over each of them before settling on Ilara with a final, silent nod. With that, the patrol stepped forward as one, crossing the threshold from the world of men into the vast, waiting silence of the wild. The patrol moved with a quiet rhythm that was Ilara's doing. She guided them not along the open ridgelines favored on maps, but through the sheltered, rocky draws and beneath the dense canopy of ironwood, where the snow was firmer underfoot and left fewer signs of their passing. It was the path of someone who understood the forest, not as a place to cross, but as a place to listen to. With each mile covered without incident, the initial tension in the ranger's shoulders eased, replaced by a focused confidence in the young woman walking point. That confidence was tested when they came upon the carcass of a massive elk. It lay in a small clearing, its body intact but frozen solid, a statue of sudden loss. There were no wolf tracks, no signs of a struggle, only the pristine, unbroken snow around it. The air itself felt thin and sharp. This was not a hunt. It was a statement. Ilara did not allow the men to linger. Her voice, low but clear, cut through the uneasy silence, ordering a shift in their marching order. She placed the veterans on the flanks, their experienced eyes scanning the tree line, and pulled the group into a tighter, more defensible formation. The unseen presence was a weight they all now carried, a silent tax on their energy and attention that threatened to fray their resolve with every step. But her calm command, her refusal to show the chill that had settled in her own bones, became an anchor. When they finally halted for the night within a natural ring of ancient, moss-covered stones, the camp was set with a swift, wordless efficiency. As the others settled by the small, carefully shielded fire, Ilara climbed to a perch on the largest stone, her bow across her knees, and took the first watch. Her gaze was fixed on the wall of shadows between the trees, searching for a flicker of movement in the absolute stillness. The rhythmic scrape of steel on whetstone was a small, steady heartbeat against the immense silence of the night. Seated by the watchfire's low glow, Ilara worked the edge of her new dagger, the Weirwood pommel a familiar weight in her palm. This simple, mindful task was more than maintenance. It was an anchor, a quiet ritual that kept her own senses sharp and seemed to soothe the restless sleep of the younger rangers nearby. The fire's warmth was a fragile bubble in the endless cold, its crackle a comforting shield against the dark. Then, from a great distance, a lone wolf howled, its mournful call echoing through the frozen valleys. It was a normal sound, a part of the forest's night music. But a moment later, it was answered by another howl, much closer, that lifted the hairs on her arms. This one was higher, sharper, with a strange, broken quality that didn't sound like any wolf she had ever heard. The rhythm was wrong, the tone almost questioning. She did not startle, her hands stilled. With a silent, deliberate motion, she sheathed the dagger and moved to where Denai slept, her touch on his shoulder light but urgent. He was awake in an instant, his eyes meeting hers in the firelight. She didn't need to speak, only to tilt her head toward the wall of trees. They both listened as the unnatural cry faded, leaving a deeper silence in its wake. The decision was made without a word exchanged. A single, sharp gesture from Denai's and a handful of dirt, thrown onto the flames, plunged their world into absolute darkness. The comforting bubble of light was gone, replaced by a cold so profound it felt solid. In the utter blackness, the patrol stood to, every man and woman, a statue with weapon in hand, their breathing the only sound. Waiting in that void tested every fiber of their training. Every rustle of a pine branch in the wind became the scuff of a footfall. Every creak of a settling tree trunk sounded like the approach of something immense. The line between vigilance and raw fear was as thin as a blade's edge, and the cold began to seep past wool and leather into their very resolve. Then, almost imperceptibly, the eastern sky began to soften from black to a deep, bruised gray. The false dawn revealed the world in shades of monochrome, and with the growing light came the evidence. Etched in the pristine snow, a wide, unbroken circle of massive, deep-set paw prints surrounded their camp, passing just beyond the ring of stones where the firelight had once reached. Something very large had paced them all night long, a silent, patient hunter that had studied their defenses from just beyond the edge of sight. The stone foundation of the old outpost was no longer a ruin. It was a fortress reborn, its crumbling walls bristling with sharpened stakes and manned by dozens of wildling warriors, their faces hard and their eyes wary. A charismatic chieftain stood at the forefront, his posture radiating a defiant ownership of the high ground. The patrol was caught in a terrible vise, the wildling force before them, and the memory of the circling prince, the unnatural cold, pressing in from the forest at their backs. A fight here would be a massacre for both sides, a bloody gift to the true enemy waiting in the gathering dark. Every instinct screamed for battle, but Alara saw the deeper trap. She slowly unbuckled her sword belt, letting it fall to the snow with a soft thud. She handed her bow to a stunned ranger beside her. Then, holding only the pouch of Dragonglass and the memory of the Weirwood's piece, she stepped forward, alone and unarmed, into the open space between the two armed lines. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice, when it came, was clear and carried the weight of the frost-bitten wilderness itself. She did not plead. She presented a simple, brutal truth. She spoke of the cold that did not feel, the silent hunters that left no tracks, the creature her arrow had shattered only to see it reform from the mist. She told them of the carvings in the cave, of the long night that was not a legend but a warning. Your spears and our swords will mean nothing when that winter falls, she said, her gaze locked with the chieftain's. You can kill us today, and you will still be here when the true enemy comes for you next. We offer you these. She opened the pouch, tipping a few black arrowheads into her palm, holding them out like dark seeds of hope. Weapons that can hurt what your steel cannot. Stand with us here tonight, and we might all live to see the dawn." The chieftain was silent for a long, tense moment, his eyes searching hers for any hint of deception. He saw no fear, only a stark and honest certainty that mirrored the harsh land they both called home. He looked past her at the grim-faced rangers, then back at the darkening tree line. With a slow, deliberate nod, he spat on the ground between them, not in anger, but in pact. He called out to his people, his voice rough but clear, "We will watch with the crows tonight." The alliance was as fragile as thin ice, but it was forged. The two groups began the uneasy work of merging their defenses, a shared vigil against the ancient cold, where the only choice left was to stand together or fall alone. The first true snow of the deep winter began to fall, each flake a silent promise of the long darkness to come. Ilara stood on the shared ramparts of the Watchtower, the wildling chieftain, a solid, watchful presence beside her. Below, the sounds of a combined camp rose in the twilight, the guttural accents of free folk mingling with the familiar cadence of the night's watch as they fortified the walls. This fragile alliance was a living thing, built not on old hatreds, but on the stark understanding of the enemy that cared for neither. The tower itself was more than stone and timber. It was a testament to the journey that had brought her here, from a recruit trembling at the gate to a leader who saw a bridge where every map had drawn a wall. The biting cold still whispered from the north, and the dark between the trees still held its ancient secrets, but the silence was different now. It was a silence they guarded together. Her fingers found the weirwood pommel of her dagger, its familiar warmth, a constant, steadying pulse against her palm. The long night was coming, but they would meet it not as scattered tribes or a lonely brotherhood, but as sentinels of the dawn, facing the gathering dark one watch at a time. you.